Russia's president is calling on Ukraine's last remaining defenders in Mariupol to surrender. The fighting is focused on the Azovstal steel plant, where civilians and soldiers are sheltered mostly underground. Russia claimed it would pause its offensive to allow civilians to evacuate. But Ukraine says the facility was under attack from Russian troops throughout the day.
The battle for Azovstal continues. This video, released by the far-right Azov regiment, shows heavy shelling on Ukraine's last stand in the besieged city of Mariupol. Russia says it is ready for a ceasefire to allow a humanitarian corridor out of the steel plant, but Ukrainian fighters claim otherwise. For the third day, the enemy has broken through the territory of the Azovstal plant, where heavy bloody fighting continues. Once again, the Russians violated the promise of a truce and did not allow the evacuation of civilians who continue to hide from shelling in the Azovstal plant's basement. Yet, the UN has confirmed that it has successfully evacuated hundreds more from Mariupol during a brief ceasefire on Wednesday.
We are accompanied by 11 buses filled of civilians, women, children, and elderly who are seeking safe haven.
Those who have made it out are relieved to finally be safe. But they are also worried about the ones left behind. I don't know who to ask to get them out of there, If they don't, they will all be killed. There may be hope of a fresh ceasefire holding. A UN convoy on its way to Mariupol is hoping to use this to evacuate more people.
Earlier, I spoke to Saviano Abreu, who is with the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and has been part of operations helping get people to safety from Mariupol. I asked him what he'd heard from evacuees.
Thanks for having me. And about the evacuees, I think what comes to my mind, the experience that I had with them and my colleagues had with them in the last days, is the trauma that they are facing, the trauma they're experiencing after these 2 months of war here in Ukraine. In the last days, as you mentioned before, we managed to evacuate more than almost 500 people now from Mariupol, surrounded areas, and Azovstal plant, and people that are coming from there that are extremely traumatized. Yesterday, in one of the convoys, I remember well, one of the women that came with us, one of the buses, the moment of the evacuation, we come from Mariupol and from areas controlled by the Russian government now, in the Russian buses, and in a certain point they have to do the change, and they come to the Ukrainian side already in the Ukrainian buses. This specific woman, she was so traumatized that she couldn't trust anyone. She couldn't speak, she couldn't talk, she couldn't walk from one bus to another one, and she couldn't trust even the humanitarians that are trying to support her. So you can imagine how difficult it is for someone experiencing this heavy shelling every day over their heads and not knowing if they're going to survive this. So this is the situation that people here in Ukraine are facing now.
They've had absolutely harrowing experiences. We understand there have been many deals struck to get civilians out of Mariupol. What is stopping evacuations then from happening to bring more people out?
It's extremely difficult and dangerous environment for us to operate. We are operating a war zone, so we cannot forget that. We cannot minimize the situation. And to get to Mariupol, to get to Azovstal plant, or to any area that's experiencing fighting, it's necessary the agreement from both parts to the conflict. So to break this agreement, to get to this agreement, it's highly level engagements with both governments to make sure that we can operate, that we can have we can pass and have the safe passage for civilians. This specific evacuation that happened in the last days, we have been organizing it or engaging with the parts to conflict for the last couple of months and trying to make sure that we could do that. And the breakthrough was recently when the UN Secretary General went to Moscow and then came to Ukraine and visit Kiev as well. So this was the moment that both governments agreed that we could start to move, and we did in the last days, the 2 convoys of evacuation that we all know already now.
Now, the UN has confirmed that there is a new evacuation convoy on its way to Mariupol. How optimistic are you that you'll be able to get everyone out who needs to be evacuated?
We saw in the last days that we can make it if we have the parts to the conflict willing to make it happen, it will happen. And we are positive and are hopeful that we can make sure that we can evacuate all civilians that are trapped in the area. We have to also remember that we have to evacuate people that want to be evacuated. It has to be a decision of each person if this person wants to leave or not. And this was as well one of the challenges that we faced in the last days. In Azovstal, people have been living underground for 2 months without knowing exactly what is happening outside, without seeing the sunlight for 2 months. And they were afraid to leave. They didn't know if it would be safe for them to leave, if it would be safe for them to move around. And they didn't even know if they could trust that they would be taken to areas that they want to be taken to.
Xavier Abreu with the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, thank you so much for taking the time to share that with us on DW.
Thank you.
And our correspondent, Matthias Bollinger, is reporting for us from the city of Mykolaiv. He offered an update from southern Ukraine.
So Mykolaiv was one of the cities where the Russians approached very closely. They have been in the suburbs of the city, and fighting has been quite intense since the beginning of the war in this area. This is the city that lies in between Kherson, which is Russian occupied, and Odessa, which was one of the targets of Russia, which was one of the cities that Russia wanted to, and they have said so, they wanted to conquer, and they were stopped here. So as they were stopped here, fighting was very intense here. They've been pushed back a little bit from the city now, so shelling has become less here than it used to, because much of the artillery that doesn't have a very long range is now far enough from the city. We've seen some of the positions today. The two sides have now moved on to a war of attrition. They are in trenches and they're facing each other, shelling each other. The city so far is cut off from water, and that's one of the main problem here in the city, because the water is coming from the Russian-occupied territories, the water supply. So water has to be brought in here by trucks or by any other means. There's no water coming out of the tap here.
A very difficult situation in Mykolaiv, and so much has been focused on Mariupol in recent days and weeks. But I think it's important to remember that the war is playing out across a front line hundreds of kilometers long. Is either side making gains overall, would you say?
Incremental gains. There are some movements along the front lines. We've been hearing that the Ukrainians have also been able to push the Russian troops further away from Kharkiv. Kharkiv is another city where they have come very close without being able to enter the city, and that has been heavily shelled from these positions. This seems to have eased a little bit, but in the Donbass area, which is the main area of fighting right now, things don't really seem to shift a lot. Both sides are engaged in heavy battles, but nobody is able to break through the other lines. Russia is trying to break through the Ukrainian lines, but the Ukrainian lines hold, and Ukraine has been able in the past few days to make some smaller gains to push back the Russians here and there, but it doesn't look like anything is being decided at the moment.
Our correspondent, Matthias Bollinger, in Mykolaiv, southern Ukraine, thanks so much for your reporting. Now, southeastern Ukraine is one of the most dangerous places for foreign reporters. But a team from French public TV traveled with Russian units to see how local people are dealing with the Russian occupation. What they found were communities who, just a few weeks ago, were fighting invaders, were now choosing their words very carefully.
Mariupol in southeastern Ukraine. Those who reduced the city to rubble now bring aid.
Everything was good and functioning. Now everything is destroyed. Don't talk nonsense.
She is only here to provoke. Aren't you here for the aid? What are you talking about?
There is tension in the air, but somehow life carries on in the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. People are even getting married, like here in Berdyansk, 80 kilometers from Mariupol. These are the first weddings since the war began. Now the flags are red, white and blue instead of blue and yellow. It's on show for the world to see. The Russian anthem plays for the wedding ceremony, and the bride and groom beam with joy.
It's going well.
We are very, very happy.
It's an important day for the city.
And for us. And we are very proud of the country.
Of which country? The French journalist asks.
Russia.
The marriage is marked by celebratory gunfire, while just a few kilometres away, soldiers kill. In occupied areas, Russia has installed mayors who say what Putin wants.
We have a military and civilian-led administration. We see our future with Russia.
This is also being demonstrated in Mariupol. The central square is draped in Soviet colours ahead of the commemoration of the Red Army's victory over Nazi Germany on the 9th of May. Just a few weeks ago, residents protested the occupation. Now, officially at least, there's barely any dissent.
I came with the red flag to celebrate Russia's victory. I am not afraid of anything because we have always lived well with Russia.
They have raised new flags. Before, it was ours. And there are always soldiers here, not ours.
What do you think about that? Asks the French TV crew.
It's hard to say. We're neutral. Let's put it that way.
A new era has begun in the occupied areas of Ukraine. In some places, the ruble is being introduced as, day by day, Russia looks to expand its influence over all areas of life.